Welcome to Dead Man Talking. Tonight's show is an exciting Dogman werewolf themed show tonight. Two very, very scary stories that I found. You may or may not have heard them before. Either way, they are fantastically scary and I'm sure will haunt your dreams. Without further ado, let's get into tonight's first story, entitled, My Grandfather Had a Few Bizarre Wildlife Encounters in the Forests of Michigan. Since it's starting to get colder in upper Midwest, I decided that I would share some of my grandfather's stories he told me about his time working as a forester in Michigan's Manistee National Forest. He never got a chance to write any of his experiences down, so I thought I might post them here. For some background, my grandpa started working in Manistee area in 1949, when he was just 28 years old. Before then, he had been drifting around the region, doing odd jobs in logging until he was hired by the Forest Service in the northwest part of Michigan's Lower Peninsula. The work, as I understand, was slow, and most days he and his crew were sent to different parts of the forest to address various tree and land concerns. Grandpa was always an avid outdoorsman, and he enjoyed hunting and fishing just about as much as anyone in the region. Sadly, he died in December of 1998, when I was still rather young, but I remember whenever we went to visit him and Grandma, he would sit me and my brother down and tell us about his days in the Forest Service. Working outside every day allowed him to witness all sorts of wildlife, like black bear, whitetail, fox, and even bobcat back in those days. He often relived his encounters with bears while he was deep in the forest, telling us that those moments were some of the most memorable of his entire life, being up close to such beautiful and yet powerful animals. Usually his tales were exciting, and the enthusiasm of which he told them inspired us to go out to the backyard and look for animals ourselves in between the pines. Although there wasn't much wildlife around Grandma and Grandpa's property, they still always kept a close eye on us and never let us wander too far from the house. Finally, a few years before his death, Grandpa deemed my brother and me old enough to be told exactly why that was. I was about 9 and my brother was about 11 when Grandpa first opened up about the strangest things that had ever happened to him. All our childhoods we had heard him go on and on about the peace that the wilderness brought him, or used to bring him. But this time, his tone was completely different. I don't remember all of the details, but I asked my brother to help piece together Grandpa's story, and my dad as well. You see, he too had heard of the experiences in question multiple times. It was the mid-50s, he never gave the exact year, and October had rolled in behind cool autumn breezes and the sound of Canada geese flying southward. The first of his strange stories had occurred at night, as he was driving home from a local bar where he and his crew had spent the last few hours after work. It was a windy night, and the pines on either side of the road were blowing ferociously. No moon nor stars could be seen through the thick cloud cover. So, The only illumination of the road ahead came from Grandpa's headlights. By his reckoning, he must have been going close to 50 miles per hour at the very moment when something huge leapt across the road, not 20 feet ahead of him. His headlights had shown the animal's silhouette. It was dog-shaped, but massive, almost stretching the entire way across the road. It only made one bound to get from one side to the other, and its size alone was enough to unnerve Grandpa. At the time, he had assumed that the animal was just a very large wolf, except timber wolves hadn't been spotted in that region for decades. He considered it a bizarre encounter, but nothing came of it that night, and he was able to return home without anything else strange happening to him. The second of his stories admittedly frightened me enough to avoid going outside at night for years. Even now, I'm wary of noises in the dark because of the obvious fear in Grandpa's voice when he told us of his second experience. Some details here were provided by my dad. It occurred in the same month as his first encounter, a few weeks later, on a night that was pretty cold for the season. It maybe hit 40 degrees, but it was a calm night with little wind. Grandpa's house at the time was really small, and it stood in a lot with about 6 other similarly sized and built edifices. None of his neighbours tended to stay up very late, so it surprised him to be awakened by loud noises at about 1 in the morning. They sounded like scratching on sheet metal, with occasional thumps and bumps like an animal was trying to get in. Grandpa apparently got up, fetched a flashlight, put on his boots and went out into the front room of which the walls of consisted of mosquito screens stretched between wooden framework. Once in the front room, Grandpa could hear the sounds more clearly, and they were coming from his nearest of his neighbours' homes, maybe just 50 yards to his right. It was incredibly dark out there, with no street lights to illuminate. The neighbour's house had a porch light on, but Grandpa couldn't make out what was creating the racket through the screen. So, he slowly opened the front door and looked out. He described to us in great detail the animals that he saw there, and he always said he would remember them exactly as they were, for fear brands memories the strongest. He said 3 massive dogs covered in long black hair were up against his neighbour's house, scratching at the siding and making visible claw marks with every swipe. Each beast stood about 7 feet tall, with their front legs stretching for another 2 or possibly 3 feet, and easily reaching the roofing and the gutter of the house. Their scratching, however, did not make it seem like they were trying to get into the house, as Grandpa explained. He thought that they were doing that to get whoever was inside out. The next part was actually the hardest to get out of Grandpa. It was strange that he was so eager to tell us everything thus far, despite how he felt about the subject. But he was rather hesitant, as I remember, to divulge the last horrifying details of his encounter. He claims that the animals then noticed that he had emerged from his own house, just across the lawn, for each one turned to look straight at him, just 50 yards away. They had pointed ears like a wolf, and huge bodies that rivaled large black bears in size. They also supported themselves not with 4 legs, like any other native mammal, but instead they stood on just 2 legs, each towering 7 feet above the ground. The sounds that they proceeded to make, Grandpa has said, would haunt his dreams for the rest of his life. It was a shame that he could neither produce recordings nor accurately mimic the so unwolf-like screams the animals made. For the detail always fascinated me the most about his story. They didn't sound like foxes, coyotes, or bobcats. Instead, they forced half scream, half howls out of their jaws that Grandpa was sure held the teeth of a carnivore. Grandpa never told us exactly what happened next. I guess we assumed that he ran inside, locked the doors, and didn't look outside until morning. He would tell us that 4 of his neighbours, including the elderly couple that lived in the nearest house, they didn't stick around very long. He did say that he tried to talk to them about what had happened that night, but they remained evasive and never gave him any straight answers. That turned out to be somewhat ironic because Grandpa himself kept tight-lipped about many of the details of his stories. He would say that he heard those exact screams on 2 other occasions, both of those times while he was in the Manistee Forest, and he showed us an old Forest Service report detailing a possible timber wolf sighting in the area, complete with photographs of huge padded paw prints in the mud. The thing is, Grandpa never told anyone his stories but his most trusted family, which is unique among Michigan Dogman witnesses. After the craze that Steve Cook's legend song stirred in the 80s, it's no wonder that so many stories from the region surfaced. I had heard a few bits and pieces around the so-called monster before Grandpa told us his tale. But it wasn't until later in life that I realised his encounters had to have been the same creature. Whether I believe him that massive wolves walk upright through Michigan forests, well, I'm still not so sure. But as a modern zoological curiosity, the stories of strange beasts from a passionate woodsman who knew his wildlife certainly remain among the most remarkable that I have heard, simply because of the genuine emotion of which he related his tales. Legends like these might just be figments of our collective imagination, so all I can do is present what I have heard and let others judge for themselves what is real and what is pure fiction. Anyway, as the song goes, don't go out at night. Wow, I hope you guys enjoyed that story. I absolutely love reading through this story and narrating it. Please do let me know down below in the comments, guys. As ever, please do like and share. And remember, folks, be safe, not sorry.